Hi.
Hi, buddy.
How's it going?
Very good. It's interesting to have this book out because when writing it, you're just alone, and you're typing away and you're all in your own head. And then last night we had this first kind of an event where these lovely folks in a book club came and they sort of asked me questions about the book. And my initial reaction was, well, how did you know that?
Yeah, right.
And then I realized, oh, right, I published it.
I told them about it.
Yeah, so it's interesting to see how people are reacting to it in the world now.
Well, that's the thing. When I saw you were putting out a book, you would have been forgiven for putting out a book about your exploits, about everything you've done on 22, everything you did before that. But you told some really personal stories here. Why was the impetus of that?
Well, when you started going down through the story of your childhood, I guess it's pretty reflective, and I think there's the natural thing is to censor yourself and go, oh, no, I'm not going to put that in there. Oh, I shouldn't say that. And so at a certain point, I just decided, okay, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to write what I want to write, what I feel like I should write, what I'm drawn to write. And some of that was funny, and some of that was sad, and it all came together, hopefully in a way that's enjoyable.
One of my favorite characters in the book is your mom. This is one of my favorite quotes. You write, "She drove a car the way someone might fire a starter pistol for the first time, eyes closed and facing away."
Yeah, mom would go in there, kind of like back in the 70s, you see Evel Knievel being strapped in, and it's like, boom, shot across the Grand Canyon. But she would often accelerate and close her eyes and get into. I remember once we were driving down Ken Mile Road, which is a big major highway in St. John's, and mom saying, "Oh, that fella's in the wrong lane." I was like, "No, we're not. We're in the bang." And then woke up in the back, passed out of a Mounties car, and he's like, "You can't be driving like that." And she's like, "Well, it's his fault," and just coming to. And looking back at that, I don't think that was weird. What I think was that they just, in those days, it says, the kid's knocked out, we'll put him in the back seat till he wakes up. Like there was it was a different kind of Newfoundland childcare.
He'll be all right.
Shake it off. Yeah.
And you talk about going to school at St. Teresa's out in Mundy Pond, which I really should not be so colloquial about. You were in St. Teresa's, which is a school in the east end of St. John's.
Yeah, a Catholic school.
An area we know as Mundy Pond.
Yeah.
Beautiful part of town, known as a bit of a hard part of town.
It was harder then, and it was, kind of I guess you'd call it a tough school, like one of those places, like, don't go up around there now, the crowd from Money Pond, they'll get you, kind of a thing. But that was kind of more generational going back. That had its reputation. Mm-hmm. Everybody there was lovely, but I mean, kids who went to school there, many of them had been in fights and stuff like that. And I had never been around children, really, because we lived far away from the center of the city, next to a radio station where my dad worked. And he was sort of the emergency go-to guy. So we had to live next to the station in case a DJ fell asleep during the night or in case the transmitter went down. So there were no other kids around. So when I went to school, it was my first kind of interaction with other kids. So I'd be sitting there and then they could smell the fear in me, So that was overwhelming, yeah.
And you were bullied in the most Newfoundland nerd kind of way, in which they stole your Pepsi. Not Coke.
No,
your
Pepsi.
Yeah, your chips.
Yeah.
And your cello.
Yes, the nuns made me play cello because I was the huskiest child, and they're like, "We think you could lift the cello," which is, as all great maestros are chosen by the instrument's sake. And the people with avian bone syndrome, the hollow bones, they play whistles and flutes, and then the huskier children are given cellos. And so these guys, there was a family of them. Like everybody was like, it's one of those places where like, I'm gonna beat you up after school, and my brothers are coming. Right. And this is before cell phones, but somehow at 3:00. 7 brothers of varying ages who looked just like the guy be waiting like, "I heard you shoved my brother at recess. You're a grown man." "Yeah, well, we're going to fight now." Like, you have children. And so these guys stole my cello, which is like, if you're going to be jacked for a cello, it's like, what are you going to do with the cello? It's like, this is a big guitar. It's like, you don't even know what it is you're stealing. And then I had to get my cello back. So that was it's hard to feel tough after your cello's been jacked.
But it led to a really beautiful moment. It led to a moment of at least great empathy. So you go to the bully's house.
Yeah, I go to the bully's house, and the cello had been hidden in his backyard. And so we're going through the house, and we had to get there, and his father was kind of passed out, asleep watching wrestling, shirtless, with some cans of beer around in, that great Newfoundland version of The Thinker. And we went out into the backyard, and I find my cello, and I'm lugging my cello back through the house, and I was like, I had to call my parents. And he's like, you can't do that. You wake him up. And I'm like, I'll be quiet. And then it's like, I call home, and I'm like, oh, hi. And he wakes up, And he's like, what are you doing in here stealing our phone? And kind of like, it's like, well, no, that cost me money. It's a local call. I don't know if you know how phone systems work. And he got really, and then he hit my friend and we made a break for it. And then I kind of realized like, oh, I see why you're like that.
Yeah, I see why you're building.
You're paying it forward. And then after that, we became, kind of close friends and he was kind of protected me a bit, yeah.
The great story of Newfoundlanders going to get things stolen from them are some of my favorites. My brother told me about his buddy who got his dog stolen from his backyard one time, and he went down to his house and knocked on the door and said, "Excuse me, I think you stole my dog." And the buddy's father went, No, I didn't steal your dog. And he saw the dog in the back in the kitchen, like
that
yapping away.
That happened to me once.
Really?
Yeah, I was going out with a lady and a Malamute was stolen, and then they said, "Oh, our dog was stolen," and the guy called saying he wants money for it, and this is his name. And I'm like, "He gave you his name and phone number?" Yeah, and I was like, I know him. And then I had to go to his house, and I knocked, and everybody was walking towards it. Was, "Are you the guy who got the dog stolen?" That's Buddy down there. And I was like, "Okay, yeah." So I go in there, and he opens the door, and I'm like, "Hi there." And he's like, "Oh, hi." And we went to school together. And I said, "You got a dog." And the dog's name was Ska. And he goes, "No, there's no dog here." And I said, "Here, Ska, 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 Ska." And the dog came running forward. I said, "We'll just keep this between ourselves." But then her parents thought I was connected to the underbelly of dog thievery, and we had to break up.
I just assumed you were. If you're just tuning in, I'm speaking with, that's why you're here. I'm speaking with Mark Critch. You probably have seen him on This Hour 22 Minutes. He just released a new book all about his own life, Son of a Critch, a childish Newfoundland memoir. I thought you opened the book by explaining that Newfoundlanders can lay claim to almost anyone as a fellow Newfoundlander. Gene Simmons is from Newfoundland. That means Gene Simmons' girlfriend is from Newfoundland.
That
Shannon
means Gene
Tweed.
Simmons is a Newfoundland. It means Kiss is a Newfoundland band.
Exactly. I mean, I get this all the time. Newfoundlanders write into this show and saying like,
"Oh, he's a Newfoundlander."
You were talking David Attenborough. Well, one time he showed a puffin.
Oh, yeah.
Puffins are from Newfoundland, so he's kind of a Newfoundlander.
John Williams, the guy who scored Star Wars, he of course he got a start at CBC Radio in Newfoundland during the war, so he's a Newfoundlander. For Bill Cosby, spent time in Argentia in the mill for a long time. He was a Newfoundlander, but now he's an American again.
We don't want him anymore.
No, he's like, oh yes. Well, he wasn't here very long at all.
So I thought we'd play a game. I wanted to challenge you to claim the following people as Newfoundlanders.
Yes, sir.
Okay. First is one in the book, which is the current Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau.
Justin Trudeau is a Newfoundlander because, of course, Justin Trudeau's father, Pierre, he spent a lot of time in Newfoundland, of course, with Joey Smallwood and everything. And he went swimming actually once, and he came down and went salmon fishing when Christopher Pratt was just telling me about that. So once you come down there, and of course, at Christopher Pratt's house, he would have had rum and he had fish. So basically, it's like kissing a cod. So he's basically screeched in by Christopher Pratt. Therefore, his father was a Newfoundlander, so he's a son of a Newfoundlander.
There you go. He's in. All right. Dwayne Johnson, a.k.a. The Rock.
Oh, The Rock, of course. He got that nickname from The Rock, of course. Like, he used to work out in Belle Island in the mines at Rock, and the boys used to say, "Look, a Rock there now with The Rock." Now, he's from Hawaii, of course, which was an island that joined America in 1949. Now, if you're from an island that joins a country in 1949, then technically you are of that country. Therefore, technically, he's a Newfoundlander.
Perfect. Beautiful.
Thank you.
I got a hard one for you now. Host of As It Happens, Carol Off.
Oh, Carol Off. Mm-hmm. Oh, yes. Of course, her actual name is Hoft, but Newfoundlanders don't pronounce the H. So for a year, she was a Carol Hoft, but they say Carol Oft now in Newfoundland, Labrador. Now, of course, As It Happens, she was actually spent a lot of time in Newfoundland in the 70s because she used to date Pierre Trudeau, and she came down with him, and the two of them were on the go, and then she actually got screeched in when he kissed her after kissing the cod, therefore making her a Newfoundlander.
I'm looking forward to Carol Off's eventual libel lawsuit against me. I've talked about her so many times on the show. Carol, I saw her in the hallway yesterday. I was a little bit afraid of her.
Yeah,
Carol,
that's kind of creepy.
I know.
Like,
I'm quite fond of you, Carol. I think you're the best in the business. Up next, Cleopatra.
Oh, Cleopatra, yes. Now, of course, Cleo, as we know, her last name, she was a Patra from Twillingate. And, of course, back then, Egypt, now the pyramids were built, but, of course, they were built by a lot of Newfoundlanders, It was sort of like an Alberta thing where Newfoundlanders had to go away from work, and they came in there. The Newfoundlanders were the best building the pyramids. There's all kinds of work at that. So, yes, so she went over there with a fella from Burgeo named Scott Patra. And they were married for a while, but then they broke up because Shane was sleeping around with another fella. And they split up. Now, she stayed there, but she used to come back for come home year.
Did she?
Yeah.
Cleopatra.
Cleopatra, Newfoundlander.
She used to go to the Twillingate come home here.
Twillingate come home, or she'd come back, and my God, everybody be there like having their hot dogs and their Pepsis, and in come Cleo. And she'd be carried in, and all these cats and everything. Now, she was born Catholic, but then she started worshipping cats, and oh my God, nobody talked to her, thought she was cracked, but she loved a good dance.
All right. That was beautiful. Thank you so much for that.
No problem.
So you called this a childish memoir. I will say we're not seeing the Newfoundland you'd find in a travel brochure. Like all these things we just mentioned about, the rocks and the cliffs. And
it's more of a towny thing than the bays kind of a thing. Like the Alan Doyle's book. It's a great book, but it's his experience of cutting out cod tongues and growing up in Petty Harbour. And I grew up next to a highway with no knowledge of other children, raised by elderly parents, thinking that all my best friends were close to palliative care by the time I got to kindergarten. So it was a whole other world. And then it was a little bit of a rough and tumble school at times, and I was certainly not that. But it was my experience. It's a different thing. It's very much of a city story.
Before we started the interview, we said before the microphones were on, we were saying to one another, I said, Mark, we're going to have a good time chatting with one another, but I'm going to have to ask you a couple of real CBC.
Give me the hard-hitting questions.
Sad Q questions.
Suck the joy out of the room, sir.
I will, but I think it's not everyone has the actual opportunity to sit back and write down their life. It's not a thing that most people get to do. If you're lucky, you get to think about it sometimes.
Yeah.
But most people don't even have that luxury.
No.
So to sit down and actually write down what you've gone through in your life is a remarkable thing. And I can only imagine that you must have learned something about yourself doing it.
Very much so. Well, the first thing I really learned was in a bigger scope of things, where you come from, because I would often ask Dad, we should do the family tree. And he would always say, oh, why would you do that? You spend all this money trying to find out where you came from and twice as much trying to cover it all back up again. But the reason he didn't want to do that is because there wasn't much happiness there. I mean, when he was 5, his father died of TB. And then he had to help provide for his mother and brother during the Depression. And it was very rough, growing up in those days. And he didn't like to talk about that. But before that, his grandfather drowned, a fisherman. His great-grandfather drowned. So I started looking at the family tree back to 1726, and it was all drowning, shot, drowning, died, froze, drowning, TB, Dad lived to be 93, me. So I learned, I didn't realize any of that. But when you look at your life and you think of oh, that's just the way I went to school. And then you start thinking about it. And my son, Will, who's 15, I would pass him chapters and he'd look at me like, what the hell? That's not true, is it? I'm like, yeah, what's wrong with that? He goes, oh, and he'd talk about something that happened. He couldn't believe some of the stuff. And I was like, oh, I guess that is a bit different. You start looking a little deeper, and you start to realize there's the great moments in your life. You think of the big, amazing, happy things, and you think of the traumatic things. But for me, it was like all the little gentle kindnesses over the years. You see how different people have guided you to the place you are now without realizing it. And when you look at the story as a whole, you think okay, I got through this. And then you realize, oh, no, I didn't get through it myself at all. I was put there along the path, and so that was great. And yeah, it's remarkable to realize where you came from, and how you got there, and how you were led there by the people in your life.
While I got you here, I got to ask you about the changes at 22.
Yeah.
This hour is 22 minutes. So 2 longtime cast members won't be returning this season. Greg Toomey, founding cast member who's been on the air for a long time. Sean Majumder, more recently, who's been with the show for 15 seasons. The contracts weren't renewed. Sean has said he was surprised by the decision, claimed it was over creative differences. I just want to know from you, as someone who's been with the show, how long now?
I guess probably 15 years on air, and then I started as a writer, so a little bit before then, yeah.
So how's the feeling going into this season?
The show is 26 years, right? So you have it's a life arc, and you look at something like a Saturday Night Live, things change, and et cetera. And you look at I remember when Mercer left, right? And we were brought in. And it was kind of oh, there was no social media then, so it was different. But it was oh, that's over, that's dead, that's whatever. And then the show bounced back. And a few years ago, it was going down, and then the show was cut back to just 13 episodes, and it was oh, that was. But then we kind of hurried hard, and we had a Christmas special that was over 1 million, and then they renewed us, and it's been great since then. And now there's all these different shakeups, but we're also doing, but there's a big push now for digital, right? So everybody's like, digital. And so we started doing digital daily bits, like little 10-minute things for digital. And we've had great success in that way. Like last year we had a sketch, this pot roadside stop that went up to 30 million views, which is huge. And then we had stuff now on Facebook is like a couple of million views for sketches from the show. So what I'm seeing now is we're actually, people think, some might say like, oh, that show's been on forever, is that still on, that's hokey. But we're actually probably one of the most successful digital versions of a show on Canadian television now because those short sketches really work. So you see it transitioning into this new life it's going to have. And there's going to be a bunch of bumps and things along the way and changes, but I think there's a lot of life in the old girl yet.
Thanks for coming in.
Thank you for coming and reading the book. I know how busy you are, and I feel like I owe you a beer because you had to read my book.
Oh, yeah, you do. By the way, I just thought of the Carol Off one. Ready?
Oh, yeah.
Carol Off married Lyndon McIntyre from Newfoundland.
That was so much of an easier way than getting to it.
It just occurred to me just then. He's from Lawn, I think.
Lyndon McIntyre, Lyndon McIntyre, and you know the guy from Dateline, where it's like, barbecue, shrimp, and beer weren't the only things on the menu that day. Murder was there too. Yeah. Same guy. Lyndon McIntyre is the Canadian that guy. I love Lyndon McIntyre, and a great author as well.
Great guy. Great East Coast Canadian, as they say up here.
A great Newfoundland.
A great Newfoundland. Mark, thanks for coming in.